Hi, I'm Adam Shepherd,
And I'm Jane McCallion.
and you're listening to the ITPro Podcast. COVID has forced all of us to remain indoors, and if you're anything like me, you'll have spent a good chunk of lockdown online shopping for stuff that you don't really need. E-commerce has been one of the real winners of this pandemic, and eBay is among the biggest names in the industry.
However, while eBay is a household name, you may not know that the company does more than just online auctions. The eBay Classifieds Group, for example, manages classified adverts within local communities to help people sell, swap, and share goods and services.
Joining us this week to tell us more about how he keeps this sizable network of users protected and secure is James Bynoe, Head of Information Security at eBay Classifieds Group. James, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me today on a beautiful day here in Amsterdam.
Could we kick off, James? Could you tell us a bit more about what eBay Classifieds Group does? Because, like we say, everybody, I think, is familiar with eBay, the big monolithic element, but what is it that Classifieds does?
eBay Classifieds Group is a collection of global classified platforms that primarily sit within Europe, and we do have a few assets that sit in places like South Africa and Canada. And our primary focus is to securely, and I emphasize the word securely, connect buyers and sellers all across the world from all communities with their transactions as it relates to moving and selling goods and trading, right? So I think altogether we have approximately over 280 million users within our global enterprise. And we're responsible for keeping that safe and secure.
So, James, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing in terms of your security?
Well, I think when you look at how do you protect 280 million online users and what does the team of folks that pull together do, I would say that it kind of falls into a few categories just to help you understand kind of what we look at, right? So we look at we want to be able to rapidly identify threats, detect threats. I want to make sure that our end users are protected at the end of the day and our network assets across the world. And then really importantly, we want to be able to respond. We respond to any global threats that may be happening in the cyberspace. And lastly, should anything happen, we want to be able to recover effectively and support our customers. So I think our daily lives as a global information security team are kind of broken up in these core activities, all geared at protecting the customer data, which for us is priority number one.
So, in terms of the kinds of threats that you're facing, is it more geared towards attacks against your network itself, or is it more around user based attacks such as phishing and that kind of thing?
Well, I think unfortunately there's no one or two attack vectors that we can just solely focus in on. The global cyber threat landscape has a variety of key attack vectors that we want to be always mindful of. And I'll just maybe mention a few. Within the last couple of years, we're seeing what I call ransomware with a twist, right? More intelligence behind the ransomware and its deployments. We've seen in relationships and integrations with third parties being areas that we need to pay closer attention to. For example, and then the real world realities. COVID has pushed us into a new technology reality where work from home is quite common. But however, as we embrace the work from home, it also comes with a certain amount of risk, right, associated with it. So there's a plethora of maybe that's not too strong a word, but there's a number of attack vectors that we try to make sure that we have a good beat on as it relates to keeping ourselves and our customers' data secure. And at the end of the day, that's what it's about, right? Keeping our customers' data secure and then protecting our intellectual property.
Yeah, so you touched on it briefly there. The pandemic, it must have had a bit of a knock-on effect on the way that you think about security and indeed the way that security is handled, both from the point of view of, I guess more e-commerce being done, more just purchasing being done online, but also the fact that, say, for your workers, are they working in a kind of fairly distributed environment? Everybody's quite worried about network security because your network has gone from being kind of slightly more centralized to now being basically in everybody's house. Is that an issue as well?
Well, it's a good point you bring up, and I think there are a couple perspectives to that. Without a doubt, the COVID pandemic unfortunately has driven more people online and more people to have to depend upon not only the internet for their personal needs, but also their professional needs as well. And at the same time that's happened, it's also driven more bad guys online, right? So we have these two worlds converging that need to be considered. Cybercrime as a global phenomenon, it only seems to increase. I mean, we've long surpassed international drug dealing. I think we're way beyond that at this particular time. So that is a clear and present danger that we have to embrace. I think the realities are that what we experienced in the COVID pandemic, as it relates to the surge of people online and online usage, plays out in what you see and what's happening across the industry, right? So it's a bittersweet moment, if I could put it like that, for those of us that it's a bittersweet moment from that perspective. But nonetheless, we plan and build a cyber and information security solutions, not just for today, but for potentials of the future. Being able to scale is a key consideration in all we do, right? Whether it be scale in protection, scale in a wide range of things that we need to do to make sure that we protect our customers' data. We can never predict, what's going to happen. No one could have predicted COVID, but in the digital age, scaling in terms of customer surges, customer demand is something that we fortunately tried to plan for in our engineering aspects. So there was a bit of that that went into our ability to rise to the challenge.
I just want to touch on something that you mentioned around ransomware with a twist. Is this AI enabled ransomware, or ransomware that's being delivered in new and evolving ways?
Yeah, good question. See, when you think of ransomware, you first have to understand there are a couple aspects to the delivery of any successful ransomware attack, right? There's the actual technology piece, and then there's the people piece, right? How
Mm.
do I get that human to click? And unfortunately, there's no quick fix for that part, other than
Mm.
awareness and understanding and then all the training that we try to do. But sometimes things do happen, as humans are imperfect species. Um, so I think to when I talk about ransomware with a twist, I think that the bad guys have figured out are getting smarter and more sophisticated in how to approach their deployments of ransomware. Right, they're applying a lot more social engineering in their techniques to trick people into just clicking on the wrong link, right? So again, since COVID, they've probably had a lot more time to come up with great innovative ideas of how to be, malicious or not productive to society. So we have these things in general happening. Yeah. So it's a combination. It's a combination is what I would say of more sophistication potentially in what we're seeing
Mm.
in the delivery mechanism. At the end of the day, they're still trying to steal your data and get you to pay for it to release it, right? That's what's happening at the end of the day. So to me, this is where, user training, awareness, and understanding of how to identify these threats in the first instance becomes critical.
So, speaking of education and training, what proportion of your training efforts are focused on end users of eBay Classifieds services, and what proportion are focused on your staff and internal employees?
Well, it's good. I wouldn't put it in terms of percentages. Both areas are really important, and both areas require two different things. And there's certain degrees of control that we have in certain areas and not others, right? I think when it comes to the user focused side of the fence, we publish all the appropriate guidance with regard to how people should report problems, report incidents, report any kind of thing that they feel free, right? So we have that going. Internally, we've doubled down on making sure that all levels within the corporation understand their role in a cyber threat, right? And that begins
Mm.
from the CEO of the company all the way down to staff. People are the weakest link in the cyber breach, so we have to double down on their awareness and understanding of what it takes to avoid some of these threats. Technology will only take you so far. But malicious behavior, um, people understanding the do's and the don'ts of the internet are critically important, not just for your workplace, but for yourselves at home as well.
Mm,
Right. So
mm.
I think, so it's a behavioral thing. I always make a prediction that in a few years, to be a cyber guy, you're going to have to be 2 parts technologist and 1 part psychologist, because it's all about changing people's behavior to make their behavior more secure while on the internet.
Mm.
Mm.
Do you think people are wising up at all? You'd feel that so many of these scams have been around for such a long time that people seem to be a bit more wise to them. That is my feeling, just kind of from interacting with people outside of technology, as I do every so often. Is that something that you're seeing as well?
Well, I think it can be safe to say that generally speaking, people worldwide are more aware of cyber,
Mm,
and the
Mhm.
threats that live in that world. Whether people translate that threat into something that can touch their daily lives is still TBD.
mm,
I think we all have banks, and we see the banking community really doing, to me, a great job in some countries of trying to keep people abreast of all the activities against their account. So there's a general sense of increased awareness. I also think that within the last probably 2 years, we've seen a surge in regulatory requirements, causing companies to be more diligent and committed to protecting consumer data. And I'm one of those guys that actually completely think it's a good idea. Yeah.
mm,
So I
Mm.
think I think there's been a surge in regulatory requirements and oversight, globally speaking, that hopefully will continue. And raise the bar on how we manage the information that customers are so willing to give us. It's a responsibility.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the technologies that you're using to defend your network infrastructure and your users. How are you using AI to help you manage your security estate?
Well, not to give away any trade secrets, but I think that we've found within our universe the best place to leverage artificial intelligence, and that will vary organization by organization. Yeah.
Mm.
We have found artificial intelligence to play a critical role in helping us identify malicious behavior when it comes to the insider threat in particular, right? That
Mm.
lateral movement across the network, people doing things outside of their normal pattern of life. I come to
mm,
Mm.
work, I do this, people doing things outside of their normal pattern of life that could be precursors to future, potential breaches, right? We cannot ignore the reality that if you look at all the major breaches in the last, number of years, the insider played a role in many of them. So there definitely needs to be technology deployed to do that. And in this particular space, which is ever evolving and rapid, you just can't hire your way out of this. Yeah, you've at some point you've got to find a way to use technology smart and wisely. So
mm,
Mm.
we're seeing a role for technology, for artificial intelligence in particular, in our overall information security global program.
Mm.
Clearly, we're at a point where the technology has matured to a point, in terms of cost effective, like feasible, sustainable. It's hit a few points within the last few years that really makes it a contender for
mm,
for being a component of a well balanced information security program. And then on the other side of it, whether we do it or not, the bad guys are doing it, right? So the bad
Mm.
guys are using AI to figure out how best to manipulate the globe when it comes to a range of threats. So we need to be able to counteract that. We can never ever get ahead of that, but we need to be able to respond appropriately to the surge on that side of the fence as well.
Mm.
mm,
One of the use cases for malicious AI that I've seen kind of mentioned with increasing frequency is ransomware actors and people mounting phishing campaigns using natural language processing to craft the initial wording of emails to get round some of the kind of occasional telltale signs of a malicious email. The the bad grammar, the kind of misused words.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are different ways you can approach that. It's a really good call out. Training will solve some of that. When I say training, not just training, but not just the annual click, 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 click thing that everyone seems to do, um, but actual training, right? Actual doubling down, making sure that people truly understand. Include a T-shirt if necessary. But I think that, but I think like actual training is really fundamental, and unfortunately, for many organizations, investing in people knowledge, like it's hard to show the return on investment in that, right?
Mm,
But if I can, and hopefully with time, we'll become smarter at calculating the return on investment of risk avoidance, right? Like
mm,
if I clicked on this particular link, it could cause, X number, but if I don't click on it, and that particular decision point is in front of your employees every single day. Yeah.
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah.
So I think you're doubling down on training, and then there are other things that you can do, which we tend to look at, which is to test the organization, understand what percentage your organization is able to fall victim to these kind of things. So we do
mm.
dedicate certain resources to that as well, to see if folks are actually able to identify these malicious types of emails.
So does that include things like red teaming and pen testing and that sort of thing?
It includes sending them faulty emails to see if they click on it. To cut to the chase. Yeah.
So, James, with these AI tools that you're using, how much sort of customization and development has gone into them on your part, or are they largely just off the shelf stuff that you're able to plug and play and it does its job?
Yeah, it's probably a combination of both. I think in the first instance, when you deploy artificial intelligence, the intelligence has to be able to understand your environment, understand and baseline the expected behavior across the organization, and this can take some time, right? To
Mm,
understand what the expected behavior within an e-commerce organization looks like as compared to a bank, as compared to another industry. So there is a
Mm,
portion of time that does require you to figure out exactly what your organization baseline should look like. Yeah, that
mm,
way, then you can identify anomalies from the
yeah.
expected behavior. Right. So there is a bit of not only out of the box learning time, but then also organizational learning time in tuning it to look at the behaviors that you're most interested in. Yeah.
Mm,
mm,
And then the next part would be once you've identified the behaviors that you're interested in, what are the models that you should be tracking to bring those behaviors to life, would be probably the next step. Right. And
mhm.
every environment is going to be different. People do different things in organizations. Developers download big files. Admins don't,
mm,
so when we see massive shifts in those types of things, what we call patterns of life, and by the way, we not only track the patterns of life of humans but devices. We know
mm,
how much information devices typically will pass or not pass, how it pass. We get all that intelligence using artificial intelligence. So when we see major shifts or deviations from that, we can act. Now, so there is a moment there. Now, if you're expecting the AI to be like something out of the Matrix, where it's always going to be right, we don't have that kind of AI yet. But it does allow you to get a sense of where you need to be focused. It does allow
mm,
you to get a sense of the expected, unexpected behaviors within your environment at a large level,
mm,
right?
Mm,
And at the end of the day, it's about situation awareness, right? So I think the last thing I would say is that AI gives us is, okay, now that it's combined the collection of these key observations, now what do we do with
yeah.
that collection? Do you want me to take action, or do you want me to pause the situation for you, or
mm.
how do you want to deal with it? So I
Yeah. At
think
what point do you want a human being to
Right,
get involved
exactly.
in
So I
the
think
decision-making process?
those are the kind of challenges that are not just even challenges. Those are the kind of considerations that organizations have to take into account, well thought out, to figure out how to completely deploy an effective artificial intelligence solution. Right. So the robots make the first decision, the humans confirm that decision. Yeah,
Yeah.
is what I would say. What is that? Terminator version 1, episode, series 1, we might get to, Terminator series 2 in a few years, the way this is going. but that's kind of where we are. It's a combination of using the AI with the human intelligence to figure out what to act on, what not to act on. And then also at the end of the day, you have to pay attention to people's rights, right? And not just, not be big brotherish in kind of what we're trying to do, but be more focused on protecting customer data.
Yeah.
So, speaking of those patterns of life, obviously COVID has massively disrupted those patterns, as we've already touched on. But was there any kind of level of retraining that you had to do with your AI systems to adjust it to the new patterns of life? People presumably using new devices or new categories of device than what they were before. Everyone working from home. Potentially even a shift in what they're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I mean, at a large level, yes, but it takes around a week and a half for patterns of life to be updated.
Okay.
Right. So there is an interval from which patterns of life go into to say, okay, it's this, right? And that's constantly being evaluated. But it takes about a 10-day period for it to be considered a pattern.
That's interesting. I would have that's shorter than I would have expected.
What would you have expected?
I would have expected for a system that's operating at scale. I would have expected closer to a couple of weeks to potentially even a month or more to properly bed down a new pattern.
Yeah, I mean that 10 days isn't like etched in stone.
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
but it's around that. Yeah. I mean, when you're implementing a new environment, it's around a 2-week period to understand for the AI to know what's going on at a machine level, right?
Yeah, of course.
And then you've got to take that data and then say, okay, now let me add the human level on top of that. What's true, what's not true, and then start tagging and bagging what's expected, not expected. Because if you don't tune appropriately, you end up with under a sea of information, right?
Yeah.
And on one hand, having a sea of information is great if you know how to grind through it. But so I think that's probably one of the challenges for organizations to how to slice and dice that data and make good operational use of it.
Yeah, of course, and that's something that we've seen AI. Another use case for AI within security, in particular, is sifting through log data. We ran a panel discussion last month on the use of AI in security, and that was one thing that all of our panelists agreed on was log analysis was a huge use case for it,
Right.
largely because security operatives hate doing it manually.
Absolutely. Oh my God. It is the grunt work of grunt work.
Well,
Right?
isn't this what AI is supposed to be for? Isn't it? It's
Oh,
supposed to take out
absolutely.
they call it the dangerous, the dirty, and apparently the downright boring as well. It's the stuff that's just repetitive that you really don't need a human to
Absolutely,
do.
but it's also so critical, right?
Yes.
So it's not like something you can just be half asleep while you're doing.
Yeah.
Being, the reviews of logs is a security fundamental, right? So being able to have AI now playing a role in saying, here's an incident, and oh, by the way, here's a firewall log related to it. Here's a switch log, here's a server log, here's a user log. To be able to correlate all that activity in one dashboard is like massive, right? In the old days, you'd be spinning around from PC, laptop to laptop. So yes, so there's a lot of value there, and I think that's important in a time where the threat's getting faster, right?
Yeah.
So when the threat's accelerating, your response has to also accelerate. So we're at a point, that's why I say I think we're still in that window where AI is like, can be a part of an information security program, but I think in a very short period of time, and you can bring me back on here in a few years, it's gonna be like a must, right? Because there's so many things happening. The rate, the sophistication, the duration, and the complexity of attacks are changing so fast. I could envision a world where it just plays a larger role than what you would see in a traditional information security program that's best practice aligned. I think there's a whole new generation of potential happening there.
Mm.
So, James, with all that in mind, will you be investing in more automation in the future?
I think it's fair to say that in what we're really investing is keeping our customers secure,
Mm.
right? And if that requires more automation, it requires more training, we are positioned to do whatever it takes. We look at this threat as an evolving threat, so we always keep a bead to what's happening in the threat intelligence space,
Mm.
right? So, without a doubt, as I said in the very beginning, keeping our customer data secure, making sure that we're in compliance with the international data privacy laws. Those are a primary concern for us. So I do expect to see continued investments as the threat continues, right?
Mm.
So I think the honest answer to the question is yes. I do think that we are at a big moment in cybersecurity across the globe. We've known that it's now surpassing, as I mentioned before, the international drug market in terms of cybercrime and its impact on us. So let's all be safe. Let's all make sure that we think before we click. It's kind of what I would like to end on. People should think about what they're reading before you click.
Absolutely.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. But thank you to eBay Classified's James Bynoe for joining us.
And thank you. It was a pleasure to be here with you both.
You can find links to everything we've spoken about in the show notes and even more on our website, www.itpro.co.uk.
Don't forget to subscribe to the ITPro Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and if you can, leave us a rating and a review.
We'll be back next week with more from the world of IT. But until then, goodbye.
Thanks for listening. The ITPro Podcast is brought to you by the Dennis Podcast Network.